You know that feeling when you're sitting behind the wheel of a car and you press your foot all the way down on the gas pedal?
Oh, yeah, and the engine just absolutely screams.
Exactly. The RPM needle spikes violently into the red zone, right? And the entire chassis of the vehicle is just vibrating with this incredible raw power.
You can almost smell the gasoline burning.
You really can. But then, you look out the window and realize, well, you realize the scenery hasn't changed at all.
Because you're still just sitting there.
Right. You are still sitting squarely in your driveway because the transmission is stuck in neutral. I mean, all of that explosive energy, all of that intense mechanical noise, the burning of really expensive fuel, and you haven't moved a single millimeter forward.
It is the ultimate manifestation of heat and motion creating absolutely zero momentum.
Yeah.
The machine is doing everything it was designed to do, in terms of generating power. But without the transmission engaging the gears, the power is entirely disconnected from the wheels. It's just isolated energy.
And we're starting with that exact image today because, well, I know you, the listener. You're a learner.
Absolutely.
You are the kind of person who actively seeks to, cut through the deafening noise of modern life to understand the core mechanics of how complex systems actually function.
Right. You want to know how things work under the hood.
Exactly. You are driven to make a tangible impact, whether that's in your local community, your corporate workplace, or, your own deeply personal projects. But today, we are facing head-on this paradox that drives ambitious, caring people to the absolute brink of insanity.
It really does.
Why is it that doing more so often results in accomplishing less? Why does a cultural or organizational obsession with constant, frenetic activity often become the exact mechanism that sabotages our true mission?
It is a profound paradox, and it really flies in the face of our entire modern conditioning. I mean, we are structurally wired, both socially and economically, to believe in the mathematics of addition.
What do you mean by that, the mathematics of addition?
Well, we operate on this assumption that if we just add one more initiative to the roster, or one more program to the community center, one more weekly meeting to the calendar, we will eventually cross some invisible threshold into lasting effectiveness.
Oh, I see. We treat impact as a volume game.
Exactly. But the reality, especially in purpose-driven organizations, is that unstructured expansion usually just creates a highly organized form of institutional exhaustion.
Wow. Institutional exhaustion.
Yeah. You aren't getting closer to the goal. You are just getting tired a lot faster.
Which brings us to the singular source for today's deep dive. We are looking at extensive excerpts from a deeply challenging 2026 book called Missions Ministry Mapping.
Aligning identity, strategy, and sustainability in God's kingdom.
Right. It is written by Chris Arvalosas, who is a strategist and mission leader with over 25 years of grounded in the dirt experience.
He really knows what he's talking about.
He does. And our mission today, our objective for this entire deep dive, is to decode his incredibly rigorous framework. We are going to map out exactly how to transition an organization, specifically examining this through the lens of a local church or a faith-based mission group.
Getting them out of that state of scattered busyness.
Yes, moving them out of that exhausted busyness and into a state of aligned, sustainable, and truly measurable impact.
And, while the immediate context of the book is undeniably theological, it's heavily focused on Christian church missions, the organizational diagnostics the author provides are universally penetrating.
Oh, absolutely. The principles apply everywhere.
Right. The core argument here is that true effectiveness, what the text frames as fulfilling the Great Commission, requires moving completely beyond the safety of mere activity. It demands a non-negotiable triad of elements.
And those are?
Profound theological clarity, hyper-specific contextual wisdom, and deeply disciplined stewardship. Without all three of those anchors functioning together, you're just revving that engine in neutral, burning out your people and your resources.
I want to set the visual stage for you, the listener, right now, because the cover of this book isn't just cool graphic design. It is actually a perfect, codified roadmap for everything we are going to unpack today.
The cover's brilliant, yeah.
So imagine looking straight down at an old, beautifully detailed topographical world map.
The kind printed on heavy parchment.
Exactly. Spread out on this scarred wooden table, and pinned all across the globe are these distinct, colorful markers connected by a precise network of intercepting lines. It's almost like a chaotic but intentional flight map.
But then you have the tools scattered around it.
Right. Resting on the paper are tools of both ancient navigation and hypermodern analysis. You have a classic heavy brass compass pointing true north, you have an antique magnifying glass, and the thick glass lens is focused directly, magnifying the word evangelism.
And right next to that,
Right next to those ancient tools is a sleek, glowing digital tablet.
such a stark contrast.
It really is. The screen is displaying what it calls mission data, complete with complex bar charts, regional demographic breakdowns, and predictive percentages.
That juxtaposition right there is the entire thesis of the book in a single image. I mean, you have the timeless, unchangeable elements of spiritual navigation existing in the exact same operational workspace as cold, hard data metrics.
It's all on the same table.
Exactly. The author is signaling that you cannot divorce spiritual calling from strategic reality.
And tucked over on the side of the map, there's this small, unassuming notepad with a handwritten checklist titled Mission Priorities. The boxes say, let me read this. Share the gospel, love God, love people, make disciples, transform communities.
It's all sitting right there in front of you.
The visual is aggressively communicating that your internal passion is completely insufficient on its own. You need navigation, you need absolute focus, and you need to actually measure what you are doing in reality, not just in theory.
Which is exactly where so many organizations fail.
Okay, let's unpack this. To really understand the solution Velocys is proposing, we have to start by diagnosing the illness with total honesty. Why do human beings, and particularly those of us who consider ourselves mission-driven, naturally equate visible movement with actual forward progress?
It really just comes down to human psychology, you
Right.
know, and our deep, deep discomfort with the unquantifiable.
We like to count things.
We love things that are easily measured. We naturally gravitate toward what we can see, what we can count on a spreadsheet, and frankly, what we can photograph to put in a year-end newsletter.
Ah, yes, to prove our worth to donors or stakeholders.
Exactly. In the modern church context, as the text painstakingly points out, this psychological need for validation often leads organizations to confuse visibility with vitality.
Visibility with vitality. Wow. Let that sink in for a second. You can look incredibly alive while slowly dying on the inside.
Yeah, ministry can be highly visible. It can host massive, highly produced weekend events. It can coordinate hundreds of enthusiastic volunteers in matching t-shirts.
Always the matching t-shirts.
Right. It can run multi-million-dollar fundraising campaigns and yet be structurally hollow and spiritually anemic at its core.
That's a harsh reality.
It is. The author draws a harsh, bright line between doing things for God versus doing the right things with God.
Wait, what's the difference there?
Well, when you are just doing things for God, you are operating out of your own anxious energy. You are generating excitement, but you aren't necessarily sustaining any kind of long-term transformation. You are essentially throwing buckets of paint at a canvas and hoping the splatters accidentally form a masterpiece.
Hold on, I have to stop you there because my immediate reaction as a leader, and I imagine the reaction of a lot of people listening who, sacrifice their weekends to run these programs, is pretty defensive.
That makes total sense.
I mean, are you seriously suggesting that a church running a massive food drive or organizing a citywide cleanup is actually doing something wrong if it doesn't fit some specific strategic framework? If I'm starving, I don't care about your organizational alignment or your theology. I just want the food. Isn't doing something always inherently better than doing nothing?
Your pushback is completely natural, and it is exactly the tension the author anticipates by introducing the concept of theological realism.
Theological realism, okay.
The text roots this critique deeply in the historical accounts of the Old Testament prophets, who were dealing with this exact same human tendency thousands of years ago. The author leans heavily on a famous quote from the prophet Samuel in 1 Samuel 15.22.
Which says what?
To obey is better than sacrifice.
Right.
To understand the weight of that, you have to understand the ancient context.
Right, because sacrifice was everything back then.
Exactly. Israel could offer thousands of expensive animal sacrifices. They could celebrate all the required religious feasts with perfect pageantry.
They could maintain all the outward, visible forms of religious devotion.
Yes, while their actual societal systems were actively oppressing the poor, and their hearts were completely misaligned with God's justice.
Oh, wow. So they were checking every single box on their religious to-do list. They were doing all this stuff, but the stuff had become a substitute for actual relationship and obedience.
That's it, exactly. They were using religious activity to manage God, rather than submitting to Him. The author argues that God is entirely unimpressed by religious motion that is detached from covenant fidelity.
That is a profound
It
warning.
really is. Human activity, no matter how pure the intentions behind it might seem, is incredibly fragile and profoundly inefficient when it lacks divine direction. When human effort outruns spiritual discernment, the inevitable mathematical result is burnout.
Because you're just running on your own fumes.
Right. A church might adopt an incredibly demanding outreach program simply because it's currently popular in Christian culture, or, because the megachurch 3 towns over did it with great success. But not every good idea is a God-given assignment for that specific church in that specific moment.
Which means we end up wasting massive amounts of finite resources.
Time, money, emotional energy.
Yeah, the emotional energy of our volunteers. We end up carrying burdens we were never actually asked to carry in the first place. We are back to the car in neutral.
Screaming engine, no movement.
The engine of good intentions is screaming, but there is no structural anchor to translate that energy into the specific forward motion required. So if we accept the premise that mere activity is a trap, and that filling the calendar with universally recognized good deeds can actually distract from the true mission, the glaring question is, who dictates the agenda?
That is the million-dollar question.
How does any organization actually know what their specific forward motion is supposed to look like?
This is the pivot point of the entire book. It brings us to the foundational theological concept of the text, which is the Missio Dei.
Missio Dei.
Yeah, it's a Latin theological term that translates quite simply to the mission of God. The paradigm shift the author is demanding is the realization that mission does not originate with the church.
Wait, it doesn't?
No. The church is not the architect of the mission. The mission begins entirely with God.
That completely flips the modern script. I mean, in most organizations, missions is treated like a department,
Like marketing or HR?
Yeah. It is a committee that meets on the second Tuesday of the month in a church basement to look at a budget and plan a summer trip. We treat it like an extracurricular activity.
We treat it as if the church sat down, invented the concept of global outreach, and is now frantically trying to recruit God to bless its independent efforts. The text completely dismantles that arrogance. Before the church ever existed, before the concept of Israel was formed, before Abraham was even born, God was already engaged in a singular, relentless, unfolding mission to reclaim and restore a fractured creation.
So the mission belongs to God, and the church is merely an invited participant.
Exactly.
The way the text traces the sweeping arc of redemption is honestly breathtaking. It forces you to zoom out from your little local context and see the macro narrative. Like it starts all the way back in Genesis 12.
The call of Abram.
Right.
Yeah.
God calls a man named Abram out of the ancient Near East, out of a culture of polytheism and chaos, and makes him a wild promise. He doesn't just promise to give Abram a nice piece of land or a big family.
It's much bigger than that.
God states that through Abram, all the families of the earth will be blessed. That is the origin point of the mission.
And the text draws a massive straight line from that.
It does. From that ancient promise in Genesis, straight through the prophets, all the way to Matthew 28, which is the famous Great Commission, where Jesus tells his followers to go and make disciples of all nations.
And the way the author interprets that moment in Matthew 28 is absolutely crucial. Yeah. Jesus wasn't suddenly introducing a brand new, innovative idea to his disciples.
He wasn't?
No. He wasn't handing them a blank slate and saying, okay, I've accomplished the atonement. Now I'm giving you guys a new administrative project to figure out.
Right.
He was officially commissioning his people to step into an eternal, ongoing redemptive purpose that had been moving forward since Genesis 12.
So if that is true, then Jesus himself is the ultimate model of the Missio Dei. And the author points to the actual physical posture of Jesus during his earthly ministry to prove this.
Yes. If you analyze the historical life of Jesus through the lens of Velazquez's framework, you see a leader who completely, utterly rejected the illusion of busyness we talked about earlier.
He didn't rush around.
Not at all. Jesus did not heal every single sick person in the Roman province of Judea. He did not say yes to every single crowd that was demanding a spectacle, a healing, or a political revolution.
Think about the Gospels, right? There are multiple instances where a massive crowd is gathering, the momentum is building exponentially, the ancient equivalents of metrics and engagement are off the charts.
And what does a modern leader do in that scenario?
They capitalize on the momentum.
Exactly. But what does Jesus do? He withdraws. He physically leaves the cheering crowd to go out into the desolate wilderness to pray.
That is so countercultural.
He moved only in absolute, unhurried obedience to the Father's will, even when it deeply disappointed the crowds and confused his own disciples.
I mean, every instinct we have as modern organizers screams, the crowd is here, the momentum is peaking, launch the campaign, expand the tent, pass the offering plate.
And he just walks away.
He just walks away. For you listening right now, I want you to think about how incredibly liberating that concept actually is. The realization that you are joining a mission rather than inventing one, it changes the entire psychological landscape of your work.
It takes the pressure off.
It completely removes the burden of having to be the savior of your city. You don't have to sit in a sterile boardroom staring at a whiteboard, agonizing over what brilliant, unprecedented new initiative can we come up with to fix this community.
Right. Instead, your posture shifts from frantic improvisation to calm observation.
The question becomes, what is God already actively doing in this neighborhood, and how can we humbly align our resources to participate in it?
It replaces organizational anxiety with deep-rooted calling. But, that transition from anxiety to alignment is not automatic.
It's not easy.
Once a local group of people accepts that the overarching cosmic mission belongs to God, they immediately hit the next logistical hurdle. The universe is a big place. God's mission is massive. How does our specific local group of 50 or 500 people figure out our highly specific role within that massive mission?
Right.
And this is where the author introduces a critical, non-negotiable sequence.
Yeah.
You cannot possibly build a strategy without first knowing exactly who you are. Identity must precede strategy.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If I can jump in with a corporate analogy here, because I think the text's warning against the trap of uncritical copying is brilliant.
Please do.
Think about how a corporate franchise works, like a global fast food chain. The entire economic genius of a franchise is standardization.
Exactly. Predictability.
Right. You take a universally proven model, the exact menu, the specific color palette of the branding, the precise dimensions of the deep fryers, the script the cashiers use, and you drop it into any town, anywhere in the world, and it functionally works. It is the mass production of an experience.
And churches do this all the time.
The text argues that local churches, often completely unintentionally, do the exact same thing. If a local congregation doesn't have a firm, deeply investigated grasp on its own unique theological identity, it will inevitably look at a highly successful mega-church model, operating a totally different cultural ecosystem, and just try to copy-paste that strategy into their own building.
The author is ruthless about this point. Importing strategies that look impressive in a book, or that work brilliantly for a charismatic leader in a major metropolitan hub, almost always results in practical failure when blindly applied elsewhere.
Because you can't franchise the Holy Spirit.
Exactly. Because Christian mission is fundamentally not about mass production. It requires what the author beautifully terms theological architecture.
Theological architecture. I love that phrase. It implies heavy structure. It implies load-bearing walls, a foundation that requires excavation before you can even begin to build.
A church is not a nonprofit service provider. It is not a franchise branch of a larger corporate entity. The text uses profound biblical identity markers to define what a church actually is.
What are those markers?
It is a royal priesthood. It is a chosen people. It is an alternative witness community living within the broader empire.
That's a heavy identity.
It is. If a church forgets who it is at that foundational architectural level, it will completely misread what it is called to actually do in the world. Before a church leadership team ever asks, what should our outreach strategy be this year? They have to define their theological prerequisites.
What does that look like in practice?
It means asking, what does this specific community of believers actually believe about the inherent dignity of human beings? What is their working theology of justice? What do they believe the kingdom of God actually looks like when it crashes into real-world economics? What is their actual definition of salvation?
Wow. If I were a leader trying to just get a youth program off the ground, those questions would feel paralyzing. It feels like you're asking me to write a master's thesis before I can buy pizza for teenagers.
It can feel that way, yes.
But the warnings the author gives about failing to do this are incredibly stark. The text argues that a thin theology inevitably produces a thin mission. Let's break that down. If a church reduces the massive cosmic concept of salvation down to merely a legal transaction like a get-out-of-hell-free card, then their entire organizational mission becomes incredibly narrow and almost predatory.
It's all about the transaction.
Right. The mission becomes entirely about getting individuals to say a specific prayer of conversion, completely ignoring the holistic, physical, and emotional restoration of that person's actual life.
The implications of thin theology are devastating. The text goes even further into the architecture. If a church misunderstands the nature of the crucifixion itself, if they view the cross merely as a mechanism for personal forgiveness, rather than the ultimate demonstration of self-sacrificial love and defeat of worldly power,
Would have happened.
they will start to pursue cultural influence and political power without any willingness to sacrifice. They will want the glory of the resurrection without the suffering of the cross.
So their mission just becomes a branding exercise. They want to be the most influential, highly rated organization in the city.
Exactly.
And that is so dangerous because when your theology is thin, the people you are supposed to be serving just become metrics. They become projects to be fixed, numbers to be added to that digital tablet of mission data we saw on the book cover.
But when your identity is deeply rooted,
Right, when it's rooted in the heavy architectural belief that every single human being is a sacred image bearer of God, you are forced to treat them with profound, unhurried dignity. You aren't just trying to win an intellectual argument or boost your weekend attendance numbers, you are inviting them into a family.
that is the structural integrity the author is advocating for. When a church deeply knows it is a covenant family, it values long-term, messy spiritual formation over short-term numerical spikes.
It changes everything.
It does. When it knows it belongs entirely to Christ, it has the internal fortitude to resist the immense pressure to chase whatever ideological or methodological trend is currently sweeping through the broader culture. Identity acts as the immune system that protects the core mission from infection and compromise.
Okay, so identity gives you your roots. You know who you are, you know your theological architecture, but a healthy root system still has to be planted in actual dirt.
Yes.
You still have to understand the specific chemical makeup of the soil you are growing in. And this moves the author's framework naturally from internal theological identity to external cultural context.
What's fascinating here is that the author issues an absolute mandate. Mission is always inescapably local before it can ever be global.
We tend to forget that.
We love to speak in grand, sweeping abstractions about changing the world or impacting the culture, but the text insists that real ministry does not happen in the abstract.
It happens in physical geography.
Exactly. It happens in real neighborhoods. It happens among actual people who possess very real, historically specific wounds, who are governed by hyperlocal economies, and whose worldviews are shaped by deeply entrenched regional histories.
You can't just love humanity. I mean, humanity is an abstract concept. You have to love the actual annoying, complex person standing in front of you.
Which is much harder.
So much harder.
Yeah.
To prove how critical this local intelligence is, the text points to the ultimate strategic blueprint in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul.
Oh, this is a great example.
There is this incredibly detailed example from Acts chapter 17. Paul, who is a brilliant Jewish scholar, deeply versed in the Hebrew scriptures and the law, travels to Athens. Now, Athens is the intellectual and philosophical center of the Greek world.
Right, completely different soil.
Completely saturated with statues to pagan gods and dominated by Stoic and Epicurean philosophers. Now, when Paul preached back in Jerusalem or in synagogues, he opened the ancient Hebrew scrolls and quoted the prophets because he knew his audience shared that foundational text. They understood the references. But in Athens, he doesn't do that at all.
He completely alters his approach. He doesn't walk into the Areopagus and start quoting Isaiah to Greek philosophers who have no concept of who Isaiah is.
That would just be noise to them.
Exactly. He spends time walking the streets, he observes their culture, he looks at their altars, specifically noting an altar dedicated to an unknown god.
Eugh.
He listens to their
He
debates.
did his homework.
And when he finally speaks, he actually quotes their own local pagan poets like Herodotus back to them in order to build a conceptual bridge to the gospel. He takes the eternal truth of the Missio Dei and perfectly translates it into the cultural vernacular of the soil he is standing in.
Wait, if you change the message for everyone, aren't you just pandering? I think a lot of listeners, especially those deeply committed to historical orthodoxy, would push back hard right here.
It's a common concern.
We live in a hyper-connected digital age. Everyone in my town, and everyone in a town halfway across the globe, is watching the exact same TikTok videos, arguing about the exact same global news cycle and absorbing the same monoculture. Does this hyper-local contextualization really matter that much anymore?
It does.
And more importantly, isn't there a massive, terrifying risk that if you are constantly adapting and tweaking your communication style to fit whatever local culture you are in, you eventually just sand down the ends of the truth until it means nothing at all?
Those are the exact tensions the author addresses through his framework of incarnational ministry.
Incarnational ministry. Okay.
To address your second point first, the text argues vehemently that adapting your communication is not a surrender of truth. On the contrary, it is a disciplined, rigorous, deeply respectful commitment to communicate truth effectively.
Oh, I like that.
The author implies that if you aggressively speak a truth in a cultural language or a framework that the listener literally cannot process, you haven't actually been faithful to the message. You've just been loud.
Ouch.
You have prioritized your own comfort in delivering the message over their ability to actually receive it.
You haven't been faithful, you've just been loud. That is going to sting a lot of people who confuse being confrontational with being prophetic.
It definitely will. And regarding your point about the hyper-connected digital monoculture, the author would argue that while our digital inputs might be increasingly global, our actual lived pain is always fiercely local.
That's a great distinction.
The fact that a teenager is watching the same viral video in Ohio as the teenager in Tokyo doesn't change the specific economic devastation of a Rust Belt town where the factory just closed.
Right.
It doesn't erase the specific historical racial redlining of a southern city or the specific crushing social isolation of an affluent gated suburb. The internet doesn't change the geography of local suffering.
So the local context still dictates the ministry.
Exactly. Therefore, the text challenges leaders with a set of deeply probing contextual questions that cannot be answered by a Google search. They have to be answered locally.
Like what?
What are the specific underlying unspoken fears of this exact zip code? What historical, documented barriers to institutional trust exist right here in this neighborhood? What deeply held cultural assumptions are acting as invisible, soundproof walls to your message? What forms of communication are actually intelligible, credible, and trustworthy to the people walking past your building every single day?
You cannot get those answers from a corporate franchise manual. You cannot download a PDF to tell you what your neighbors are afraid of. You have to actually leave your building, sit at a coffee shop, look people in the eye, and listen to them.
It is utilizing empathy as a core strategic tool.
Okay, so let's look at the map we've built so far. A mission-driven group has done the grueling internal work. They know their exact theological identity and architecture. They have deeply studied their local context. They know the history of the soil, and they understand the language of their neighbors.
They have the foundation.
Now, the rubber has to meet the road. They have to open the ledger. They have to look at their actual physical inventory. How are they actually spending their time, their volunteer hours, and their money? This is where the book violently bridges the gap between high-level, beautiful theological theory and ground-level, gritty, operational reality.
And this brings us back to that striking image on the book's cover. The glowing digital tablet displaying the mission data bar charts.
Right, the data.
This tablet represents the cold, hard, profoundly unromantic facts of resource allocation. It is where vision meets the budget spreadsheet. The author forces leaders to look at their bank accounts and their weekly calendars and ask a terrifying question.
Which is?
Are these finite resources actually serving our deeply discerned calling, or are they merely sustaining legacy habits that we are too afraid to kill?
Wow. Are we actually funding the mission of God, or are we just keeping the lights on and paying the heating bill for a program that fundamentally died a decade ago, but no one on the elder board has the emotional courage to cancel?
Precisely the tension. To frame the gravity of this, the author provides a brilliant, penetrating analysis of Jesus' parable of the talents from the Gospel of Matthew.
I know this one.
In that well-known story, a wealthy master entrusts his talents to his servants before going on a long journey. When he finally returns, the strict accountability he demands is not based on how much wealth they ultimately possessed.
Right, it's about what they did with it.
It is based on how faithfully and courageously they used what they were specifically given.
The third servant is the crucial one here. He's the one who takes his one talent, goes out into a field, and buries it in the dirt because he is terrified of his master. And he gets absolutely condemned. But he doesn't get condemned because he lost the money. When he digs it up, the original talent is still there.
Exactly.
He gets condemned because he did absolutely nothing with it. He successfully preserved it, but he utterly failed to steward it. He took zero risk for the sake of the master's estate.
The text uses that ancient economic reality to stress that modern leaders must never confuse abundance with alignment.
That's a huge point.
A church or an organization can be incredibly wealthy in talents. They can have massive financial reserves, hundreds of eager, highly educated volunteers, and a beautiful multi-million-dollar facility right in the center of town.
But if they don't align it,
But if those vast resources are not directly aligned with their specific theological identity and their specific local context, they're doing exactly what the third servant did. They are burying their capital in the dirt. They are scattering their potential impact into 1,000 meaningless directions.
so stewardship isn't just about saving money.
Stewardship in this framework isn't just about frugality or making sure nobody embezzles the offering. It is about deploying resources with aggressive, strategic clarity toward the ultimate mission.
Which brings us to what I think is one of the most counterintuitive, emotionally agonizing, yet absolutely brilliant points in the entire text. The profound spiritual discipline of saying no.
It is so hard to do.
In modern organizational culture, and especially in church culture, we are heavily rewarded for constant growth. We are praised for saying yes to every single opportunity, every new partnership, every request from a congregant. But the author argues that saying no is actually an act of supreme necessary stewardship.
It is the only viable way to protect the integrity of the mission. The author points out that many purpose-driven organizations wildly overextend themselves because every single need they see in the community feels incredibly urgent, and every request that comes across their desk feels deeply spiritual.
Yeah. How do you say no to a good thing?
If a well-meaning donor comes to the leadership and says, "We should really start a ministry for X," it feels mean, uncompassionate, or even fundamentally unchristian to look them in the eye and say, "No, we aren't going to do that."
Yeah.
But unbounded, unfiltered ministry inevitably leads to deleted impact and systemic collapse.
If you try to be everything to everyone, you mathematically end up being nothing to anyone. It is the textbook definition of mission drift. You start out making a deep impact in one specific area, and 5 years later, you are running 20 mediocre programs that exhaust your staff and help almost no one. You have to engage in what the book terms strategic pruning.
The agricultural metaphor is perfect here.
It is. A master gardener doesn't cut back branches because he hates the plant. He cuts off perfectly good green branches so that the main vine has the energy to actually produce heavy, sustainable fruit.
The author provides a diagnostic list of excruciatingly hard questions that leaders have to ask in order to execute this pruning effectively.
Yeah.
They have to sit in a room and ask, what specific ministries are merely surviving on life support right now? What is a legacy habit, a massive annual event, a specific committee that we only continue to do because we've always done it this way? Where are we unnecessarily duplicating the effort of another highly effective group in our town?
Those are tough.
And the hardest, most painful question of all, what genuinely good things must be intentionally released and shut down in order to strengthen the essential things that actually matter to our specific calling?
Think about how painful that is to actually execute in reality. People have deep, entrenched emotional attachments to those legacy programs. A family might have donated the money for that specific room. A volunteer might have met their spouse at that specific annual event you were trying to cancel. Pruning involves real grief.
It does. It really does.
But the text is uncompromising. A church that lacks the courage to say no will eventually say yes to far too many things. And the end result isn't a wider, more glorious impact. The result is a dangerously diluted impact, a completely burned out, cynical volunteer base, and leaders who spend 100% of their time managing internal crises instead of guiding the external vision.
That is the reality for so many leaders.
But this creates a massive, undeniable tension in the framework. If a church is aggressively pruning its branches, if they are actively looking at genuine needs in their community and saying no because it falls outside their specific calling, they are inevitably going to leave some real, tangible needs unmet. It creates a vacuum.
A huge vacuum.
So if we are all saying no to things, how does the holistic work of the Missio Dei actually get done in a city?
This is where the author's framework brilliantly expands outward. It moves from the internal mechanics of the local congregation into the broader, interconnected ecosystem of the entire kingdom. The work gets done through highly strategic partnerships.
Okay.
If we return to the Apostle Paul's biblical concept of the body of Christ, The text reminds us that no single isolated church is designed or equipped to do everything. Interdependence between organizations is not a sign of weakness or a lack of faith. It is the fundamental architectural design of the church.
That makes total sense. I mean, one church down the street might be incredibly gifted, deeply resourced, and contextually perfectly positioned for heavy mercy ministries. They run an incredible food bank. They have a network for helping the unhoused find jobs.
Right.
Meanwhile, another church across town might be uniquely positioned, based on their demographics and leadership, for complex cross-cultural training or providing deep theological education. The goal isn't for the teaching church to suddenly try to build a mediocre food bank to compete, and the goal isn't for the Mercy Church to suddenly try to start a seminary.
The goal is intelligent, humble cooperation.
Exactly.
But the author provides a massive flashing red caveat here. You must partner with deep, rigorous discernment. You do not partner with another organization simply because they exist, because they are geographically available, or because they sent you a glossy brochure in the mail. The text explicitly warns that partnerships formed without absolute clarity can be just as destructive to an organization as the frantic busyness we discussed earlier. If you enter into a collaborative effort that looks fantastic on a press release, but fundamentally lacks true, underlying theological alignment and mechanisms for mutual accountability, it will ultimately dilute your purpose and introduce entirely new dysfunctions into your system.
It is the equivalent of tying two rowboats together that are trying to row in slightly different directions. It feels like you are teaming up, but you aren't actually going to go any faster. You are just going to fight each other's momentum, spin in frustrating circles, and eventually snap the rope under the tension.
That's a perfect analogy.
Before you partner, you have to ask the hard question. Does aligning with this specific organization amplify our specific discerned calling, or does it obscure and confuse it? Okay, so let's look at the complete picture. We've mapped out theological identity, we've analyzed local context, we've looked at the ledger for stewardship, we've endured the pain of strategic pruning, and we've formed intelligent partnerships. We are executing the strategy.
We have the whole map.
The final critical question that any leader has to ask is, how do we actually know if any of this is working? How do we measure our success without falling back into the very traps we just escaped? Because the text is brutally clear on the profound danger of relying on what the secular business world refers to as vanity metrics.
Vanity metrics are the superficial numbers that look absolutely spectacular on a quarterly report but tell you absolutely nothing about the actual systemic health or the long-term viability of the organization.
Just empty numbers.
Exactly. In a modern church context, the text specifically identifies these as raw weekend attendance numbers, the sheer volume of events hosted on the calendar, or the gross size of the annual operating budget. The author's critique here is devastating.
Let's hear it.
You can have a completely packed auditorium, a frantically busy calendar that keeps everyone running, and millions of dollars in the bank, and still be utterly, catastrophically failing at the core mission of forming people into actual disciples of Jesus.
Which loops us all the way back to the stinging phrase from the beginning. Visibility does not equal vitality. A crowded room might just mean you have a highly charismatic, very entertaining speaker and a great marketing team. It does not mean that anyone's actual life, marriage, or worldview is being transformed.
It doesn't prove anything real.
Right, but if vanity metrics are toxic, my instinct as a leader is to throw out the spreadsheet entirely, to just say, we can't measure the Holy Spirit, so we aren't going to measure anything at all. We will just rely on vibes or spiritual intuition. But honestly, that sounds like a recipe for total chaos and zero accountability. Where is the middle ground? How does the book suggest we rethink the way we measure?
This raises an important question, right? The author insists that if we claim obedience is the true measure of mission, we have to fundamentally change what we measure. We have to learn to measure true, lasting fruit.
And what does that look like?
It forces leaders to answer a very difficult question. What does lasting, transformative fruit actually look like in reality? The text offers a much deeper, significantly more challenging set of qualitative metrics. Instead of simply asking, how many people came to the event? Leaders are challenged to ask, are the poor and marginalized in our specific community being served in a way that restores their dignity, or are they just being treated as passive charity cases to make our volunteers feel good about themselves?
That is a piercing question.
And here's another one. Are the new believers in our congregation actually being formed and discipled into spiritual maturity over time, or are they just lingering in the back row? Are the ministries and systems we are building actually sustainable for the next decade, or would they collapse completely overnight if our charismatic lead pastor took a job in another state?
Those are terrifying, deeply uncomfortable questions for any leader to ask themselves, because the answers to those questions are almost always incredibly slow, completely unflashy, and very hard to quantify on a bar chart.
You don't look good on a poster.
No. It takes years, sometimes decades, to see if a human being is truly being discipled into maturity. It takes immense, uncelebrated patience to build a sustainable operational system that outlasts your own tenure. It forces a church or any organization to make a definitive choice about their core values. Are they willing to endure the slow, quiet, often unacknowledged process of true, deep, systemic growth? Or are they just going to keep chasing the immediate, intoxicating, but ultimately hollow applause of the crowd?
It demands an entirely different definition of what success even is. It moves the ultimate goalposts of the organization completely away from continuous expansion and places them firmly on sustained faithfulness.
So, what does this all mean? If we pull all the way back to the 30,000-foot view we started with, the ultimate paradigm shift of missions ministry mapping is a complete radical reorientation of both the individual leader's heart and the organization's structure.
A total shift.
It is the arduous, often painful, but deeply beautiful journey of moving an entire group of people from a state of fragmented, anxiety-driven busyness, where we are just revving that powerful engine in neutral, creating heat but no movement, into a state of coherent, calm, spirit-led obedience. It proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that true, lasting effectiveness is never simply about the sheer scale of your operation or the professional polish of your public image. It is entirely, 100% about your precise, humble alignment with God's ongoing redemptive mission in the world.
And if we connect this deeply theological framework directly to you, the listener, right where you are today, the practical implications echo far beyond the four walls of a local church.
It applies everywhere.
Whether you are leading a massive nonprofit, running a fast-paced startup business, managing a complex corporate department, or even just trying to organize the daily chaos of your own household and family calendar, the core principle remains absolute. Substituting mere frantic activity for strategic clarity and deep identity will always, inevitably, lead to systemic exhaustion.
It is the great illusion of busyness. We have to fundamentally unlearn the habit of measuring our worth or our impact by how thoroughly exhausted we feel when we finally collapse into bed at the end of the day.
When you take the time to know your core identity, when you honestly and empathetically evaluate your specific local context, and when you ruthlessly, courageously steward your finite resources toward the specific things that actually matter, everything changes. You stop desperately chasing performance metrics, and you start participating in true, sustainable, life-altering impact.
That is the map. That is the framework. And I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day, whether you are driving, working, or just sitting at home. We talked at length about how Jesus, in his perfect, unbroken obedience to his specific mission, actively chose not to answer every single demand placed on him. He intentionally didn't heal every sick person, he didn't preach in every single town that invited him, and he frequently, deliberately walked away from the cheering crowds when the momentum was at its absolute peak. Think about your own calendar right now. Look mentally at your own organization's latest list of urgent initiatives. If perfect obedience and true effectiveness require that extreme level of focus, boundary setting, and restraint, what is the one genuinely good thing you are currently doing? That spinning wheel that is generating a massive amount of heat but absolutely no forward momentum that you need the absolute courage to stop doing today in order to finally put the car in drive and be faithful to your true mission.